HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Life in the Pits, My Time as a Trader on the Rough-and-Tumble Exchange Floors by Brad Schaeffer, read by Stephen Bowlby. Author's Note: From 1989 to 1994, I was first a clerk, then an options trader on the floors of two commodities exchanges, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the New York Mercantile Exchange. Those born before the turn of the century may remember them, either from the reportage of cable business channels or being featured in popular films. The equities floors, such as the iconic New York Stock Exchange and American Stock Exchange, where I also briefly traded, were gentlemanly places, in which men in suits and ties serenely bought and sold shares of stocks or options contracts. But the commodities pits, where I cut my teeth, were a seething mass of gyrating, sweaty, Type A personalities through whom the nation's commerce coursed as if part of its economic bloodstream. Compared to the hyper-fast speed of computers today, open outcry, as it was called, may seem now like an inefficient way to conduct business, screaming at each other while wildly gesturing in a sign language as unique as this mode of transacting itself. But there was a brutal honesty in how matters were conducted in the trading pits that cut through any pretense. There was also a sense of pride in being one of the working parts of the machine of capitalism itself. We were the ones who made the prices and took the risk of dealing, either as a buyer or seller, in the commodities that fueled the growth of the United States and the world for well over 100 years. The commodities exchange floors were at their zenith in both importance and as a fixture in the national psyche throughout the 80s and 90s. Trading in the pits was both an exhilarating and intimidating way to spend my day from the opening bell at dawn to the abrupt close of business in the early afternoon. One didn't dress for work in the morning so much as suit up. In fact, stepping onto the trading floor reminded me very much of running onto the football field while psyching myself up for the big game. The pits of Chicago and New York were uniquely American creations, and for me, they were without a doubt the most interesting places I've ever worked in my 3 decades and counting on Wall Street. But even as the exchanges were reaching their apogee, a shifting under the feet of many of its non-credentialed dealers who, as the saying went, would have been flipping burgers if it wasn't for the floor, was already taking place. Electronic trading was starting to come into its own, and as Moore's Law saw technology grow in exponential leaps of development and ever-accelerating frequency, it became apparent to the more astute observers that the days of the epical trading floors were numbered. Indeed, they are gone now, and a cherished part of Americana has slipped into the history books. Life in the Pits was inspired by a suggestion that I should expand upon a 2016 article I wrote for the Wall Street Journal entitled, "I'll Miss the Trading Floor." And although, like many, I have adapted well to the new e-trading world that replaced open outcry in the futures and options transaction process, something in this country died when the exchange floors closed for good. This book is both a record of and homage to that unique blend of iconoclasts, misfits, and bona fide geniuses next to whom I stood literally elbow to elbow every day, 8 hours a day. I hope in my small way I can keep alive the memory not just of those once great exchanges, but also those who made them the unique treasures they were. Over the past decade, the financial markets have changed too rapidly for our mental picture of them to remain true to life. The picture I'll bet most people have of the markets is still a picture a human being might have taken. In it, a ticker tape runs across the bottom of some cable TV screen, and alpha males in color-coded jackets stand in trading pits hollering at each other. That picture is dated. The world it depicts is dead. Michael Lewis. Greed is a basic part of animal nature. Being against it is like being against breathing or eating. Ben Stein. I want an Oompa Loompa now. Roald Dahl. Chapter 1. Respect Risk. Jim Barkhorn wasn't a rich man, certainly not by the standards of the collection of millionaires who surrounded him, pressed up against each other in a tight group, shoulder to shoulder. They jostled for position, shoving and elbowing those around them, while nervously talking amongst themselves about what today might bring. Some of the men, it was almost all men, who were wedged chest to back, as one might imagine on a rush-hour subway car, had already made fortunes in this place. Jim aspired to be one of them someday, but then again, many more had come here only to lose a significant chunk of their net worth in a short period of time, and then just disappear, never to be seen or spoken of again. As the saying in this business goes, many are called, but few are chosen. Jim had been one of the called. Whether or not he was ever to be among the chosen would depend very much on what happened in the next 6 hours and 40 minutes. All he knew for sure was that, as of right now, at the ripe old age of 27, he stood a very good chance of losing everything. He wasn't at a casino, leaning against the lip of a craps table, praying the upcoming roll wasn't a 7 or 11. Rather, he was standing in a crowded trading pit, deep in the bowels of the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. The CME, or Merc, as it was simply called, along with the Chicago Board of Trade, CBOT, its sister exchange a few blocks away, was a massive amphitheater in which commodities, futures, and options were bought and sold in a beehive of screaming, red-faced traders doing deal after deal in a manner that seems archaic today. Arms flailing, shouting, scribbling down transactions on cardboard trading cards, this place was the epicenter of commerce, in which the prices of so many of the products Americans use every day were determined. Meats like live cattle, feeder cattle, and pork bellies, butter, lumber, as well as various financial instruments that allowed one to manage interest rate exposure and speculate in the fluctuations of currency exchange rates and equities. The products Jim traded, Eurodollar options, were among the hottest new offerings from the Merc. Their usefulness in managing interest rate risk had made them a popular outgrowth of the exchange's bellwether product, Eurodollar futures. Eurodollars are what the name implies, U.S. dollars deposited in foreign banks, which are outside the realm of FDIC protection, and thus pay slightly higher interest in exchange for the added risk. Like bond futures, Eurodollar futures are used as a hedge against interest rates. As rates rise, the value of Eurodollar futures fall, and vice versa. Also, like bonds, when the equities markets show signs of weakness, they're often seen as a safe haven into which money managers can move assets and ride out the storm. And today, the stock market wasn't just caught in a squall. It was being battered by a full-fledged typhoon. This was the early morning of October 20th, 1987, and for the first time in his 2 years on the floor, Jim Barkhorn was about to see just how dangerous the markets could be. Tall and lanky, with an affable demeanor, Jim was one of the more well-liked members of the exchange. He was also one of the newest. Co-workers and others on the floor never called him Jim, but rather Jeb. This was the 3-letter acronym stamped in plain white lettering on the stiff square badge pinned at a cockeyed angle to the lapel of his cherry-red, busboy-like jacket. As he stood among the crowding traders, each preparing for what this day portended in his own way, Jeb was replaying in his head a conversation he'd had with Bill Gladstone, a longtime veteran of the pits. Gats, as his badge read, had taken a liking to Jeb, and so would offer him some well-earned nuggets of knowledge, even as they were technically competitors. But Bill was already rich, and one more trader in his pit wouldn't make or break him. Besides, they might end up doing each other favors in the future. Whatever his motivation, Gats had grown concerned for the young trader next to him. Jeb trusted Bill enough to occasionally let him glance at his options position and assess its potential profits and risk profile. Gatz had noticed that the young Barkhorn was starting to trade in lumps of contracts that were very large, indeed too large, for the $200,000 size of his account. He also tried to alert him that his account was vulnerable to an outsized move, especially to the upside. "Don't lose respect for risk," Bill cautioned the newbie. "I've seen this market do crazy things, and it's usually when you least expect it, and are most exposed. It's almost like God plans it that way, just to knock our dicks back in the dirt and keep us humble." Jeb thanked him politely, but in the back of his mind dismissed the seasoned trader's concerns as hyperbole. As far as volatility went, if Eurodollars were anything, they were slow, plodding, and at times quite boring. If he wanted the gut-wrenching action that outsiders usually associated with the Wild West of the commodities game, Jeb thought, he'd be in one of the pits where they traded corn, wheat, or metals, markets that whipsawed up and down like an EKG. Not here. As long as the Eurodollars didn't do anything crazy, he'd be able to manage any risk. But now, the veteran's words of warning were hitting Barkhorn in the face. Something strange had happened to the stock market. All day yesterday, the traders watched as the Dow tanked. Down 50, then 100, then 200, finally ending what would be known as Black Monday at 508 points down. That was a 22.6% hit, far greater than the 12.62% crash in October 1929, which ignited the Great Depression. When the Eurodollar traders went home that night, they could comfort themselves in the fact that, although the world's financial markets seemed to be ripping apart at the seams, their stolid Eurodollars barely registered concern. That had been last night. But by the time Jeb walked onto the trading floor this morning, something had changed. It was as if the world's money traders had snapped out of their stupor and were finally taking notice. There was a nervous energy on the exchange floor that Jeb had never felt before. What was it exactly? Excitement? No. More like anxiety, panic even. He stood in his spot, rocking back and forth on his feet, as the digital clock above the floor crept toward the opening 7:20 a.m. bell, examining a printout of his trading position and running what-if scenarios through his head. 5 points up or down was a pretty decent move in Eurodollar futures overnight. Erring on the side of caution, Jeb considered levels beyond that. If we open up 10 points higher, how will I do? How about 10 points lower? How about 15 even? His clerk, Mitch, came up to him. Jeb was splitting his salary 3 ways with 2 other traders. Mitch's job was to help the traders keep track of their positions by providing them updated portfolio statements throughout the day, while attending to their needs, from a request for a new pen to getting them chewing gum, like a squire to a crew of medieval knights. He wore the distinctive school bus yellow blazer-like jacket the CME required all non-members to wear. It was part of the hierarchy of the floor. "Mitch, what's the call?" Jim asked as he took a stack of fresh trading cards from his clerk's outstretched hand and stuffed them into his pocket. He was asking how much higher or lower the Eurodollars were expected to open relative to yesterday's settlement price. Mitch looked at him nervously. "Futures are 40 higher so far." "4 higher?" "No, man, 40. Jeb frowned at him with incredulity. 40? No, that can't be right. Check it again. Mitch went off to find one of the clerks for the large brokerage houses to double-check. Wherever their big institutional clients' orders were coming in pre-open would indicate the call. He got his answer and returned. "Shit, Jeb," he said. "The futures are called 60 higher now." Barkhorn was now officially nervous. He had an options position that was safe within an unheard-of 50-point move either way, but any higher or lower than that, and he was what was called short the wings. What that means doesn't really matter, other than his risk beyond a certain point was open-ended. As Gatz had pointed out first thing that morning, Jim's position was vulnerable to a sharp move in the futures to the upside. With any opening above 50, as the call indicated, Jeb would start to really hemorrhage money. At 7:05 a.m., Mitch said to Jeb in a hushed voice, "The call's 100 higher now." Jeb went numb. The market wouldn't open for another 15 minutes, and the call was moving up in 10-point increments. He was learning what flight to quality meant. Money was leaving the cratering stock market in a panic and buying Eurodollar futures in anticipation of a Fed rate cut to try and bail out a soon-to-be heavily in recession, if not depression, U.S. economy. Interest rates go down, Eurodollars go up. In this case, a lot. By 7:15 a.m., the call was 150 higher and still climbing. The young trader was despondent. He'd never felt so powerless. Barkhorn's entire liquid net worth was in his trading account. At home in his Chicago apartment, he had a wife and young children who depended on him. And yet, as it stood right now, the moment the Eurodollar futures began trading, Jeb was ruined. And there was nothing he could do about it. "In 5 minutes my life is over," he muttered to himself. Then he took a deep breath, popped a stick of gum in his mouth, and stared up at the ticking clock frowning down on him with cold indifference, waiting in forlorn silence for the opening bell to sound. Jeb felt very much like a man calmly taking his last drag on his last cigarette as he stood before the firing squad. Chapter 2. From Artist to Yellowcoat. People often ask me how I became a part of the commodities trading world, that little-known back alleyway in the financial neighborhood. Answer: obliquely. Meaning my first post-collegiate job was as far away from the trading pits of Chicago and New York as one could imagine. But, as Steve Jobs liked to say, sometimes you can only connect the dots backward. Black Monday was barely 2 years in the rearview mirror when I drove away from the University of Illinois campus in Urbana-Champaign for good with my BA in communications in hand. I had no clue as to what I wanted to do from a career standpoint, and I had no idea the commodities business even existed. Once I learned a little bit about it, there were a lot of traders scattered across the Chicagoland area in 1989, I concluded I had no ambitions to relegate my degree to becoming a gopher for crass men with high school educations who said things like, "I look at every woman I see," or "How did Lou Gehrig die?" And yet that's exactly what I ended up doing. The beginning of a journey that would land me in the frenetic trading pits of legend in the 1990s at their pinnacle and offer me a front row seat to the excesses, exploitations, hilarity, pain, and even criminality of some of the most lucrative markets most have never heard of, began, oddly enough, in an advertising agency. It was housed in the Classic Jewelers Building, a landmark downtown skyscraper at the corner of Wabash and East Wacker Drive, adjacent to the Chicago River. The building was completed in 1927, and supposedly the domed top floor was once the location of Al Capone's favorite restaurant. I often wonder if the ghosts of those raucous hoods, men who drank hard, played hard, and firmly believed neither social mores nor the rule of law had any hold on them, wafted down through the ceiling vents to infiltrate my soul in some sort of preparatory ritual for the life I would lead. I'd always been a decent artist, and even though I never took any formal classes in college, I did enough work on my own to piece together a legitimate portfolio. Through the recommendation of a girlfriend's father, who was a partner at a Chicago law firm, I found myself sitting in a sterile conference room with a well-tailored and impeccably groomed creative director of a boutique advertising agency. I nervously watched him as he flipped through my drawings. The subjects included a positive, negative John Lennon from the White Album, Confederate cavalrymen trotting through the snow-covered mountains of Tennessee, and a box of Raisinets, just to name a few. He would mutter, studying each work as would a jeweler appraising your grandmother's wedding ring. Then he'd turn over the heavy laminated sheet to the next drawing, and a gold cufflink would tap on the shiny oak tabletop like Morse. He liked that one, I guess. And finally, slamming the portfolio closed, he looked up at me. "Well," he said, removing his wire-rimmed glasses and polishing them with his silk handkerchief. "Self-taught?" I nodded yes, unsure whether that was a good thing or not. "And you say you know Ray Silverman?" I nodded again. "I know his daughter." "Becca's a peach, wouldn't you say?" I would say. "Well, then," he sighed, "perhaps there's an angel lurking somewhere in this slab of marble Ray sent me. I suppose you'll do." The following Monday, I was perched on a high swivel chair facing an angled art table, scribbling pictures of Quaker Oats chewy granola bars for presentation storyboards. A lot of good 4 years in college did me, although I had learned to parallel park, so it wasn't a total loss. I shared the room with 2 other artists who were true archetypes of the fiercely independent, creative breed with whom I've always felt a sort of kinship. Kenny had been there, it seemed, since Eisenhower was president. He sported thick glasses, a full bushy gray beard, and a flowing mane of long, wavy hair of the same silvery hue. The running joke was you never saw Kenny and Jerry Garcia in the same room. He was a chain smoker with one proverbial foot in the grave and the other on black ice, and he hacked incessantly in between drags of camels. The art room's air quality could have given a humid day in Beijing a run for its money. One of my jobs, in fact, was to descend to the lobby every morning and buy him his 2 daily packs. I was also tasked with running to the packaged goods store a few blocks down State Street under the L train and procuring the required 6-pack of old-style beer, which he slurped regularly throughout the day. For all the sins against his body, Ken was a gifted artist. He had a knack for visualizing what the account executives wanted and bringing their nebulous ideas to life through ink on 50-pound paper. The other artist, Gareth, was 3 years out of Emory. He was clean-shaven, yet wore a ponytail that ran all the way down the small of his back. He reminded me of the actor Tom Hulse, who played Amadeus in the eponymous film. Ken and Gareth both adopted jeans, sandals, and the gaudy Aloha shirt as the official uniform of their little fiefdom. They generally kept to themselves, rarely venturing out of their cloistered art room to mingle. During client presentations, they stood in silence against the wall until directly addressed. They were 2 of the happiest souls I would ever work with. This seemed like a nice start for me. I thought I might make art a career. But my stint there would only last a few months. The problem with advertising, as they used to say, was that it was a great business to be in if your parents could afford to send you. I would also discover, to my disappointment, that while I enjoyed being creative for fun or an escape, being a professional artist lost its luster when you had to be creative and or escapist by 4 this afternoon or else. This seems like an odd starting point for a reflection on pit trading, but I embark here, in a business far removed from the mathematical world of derivatives, to drive home 2 points about how a lifelong career in the commodities markets often germinated. First, back in 1989, when the trading pits of Chicago ruled, most people found their way down to the floor of either the Chicago Board of Trade or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I eventually landed in the latter via unconventional routes. Sometimes it was pure happenstance, a chance meeting at a bar maybe, or perhaps an unsolicited phone call from a frat brother who had a brother in the S&P 500 pit who knew a guy in the live cattle pit looking for a clerk. In my case, it was pure nepotism, as I'll explain later. The thing was, unlike investment or commercial banking or institutional dealing, there were no commodities pit recruiters descending upon Urbana-Champaign to shake your sweaty palms and grill you about Friedrich Hayek or Bretton Woods, or hand you a marker and challenge you to step up to a greaseboard and squiggle out the Black-Scholes model used for pricing options. You just graduated college, got your diploma, packed up your meager belongings, aimed the car north for the Chicago area, and trusted fate to do the rest. As such, most people who eventually found their way into the trading pits tended to be opportunists and scrappers, for whom tradition and convention were not so much anathema as foreign. They arrived via circuitous paths. In a strange outlier of Darwinism, in most cases, only the most inventive, creative, and resourceful people the Midwest's underrated state university system had to offer possessed the chutzpah to get onto the floor and stay there. The second reason I bring up my brief stint in advertising is that it was a good introduction to my place in the real world outside the ivy-coated university bubble. And thus, the job mentally and emotionally prepared me for what was to come. As with being a new art assistant, in order to survive your first year in the trading pits, you had to be willing to check your pride at the door, work long hours, perform the gruntiest of grunt work, and do it all for very low pay. I still lived at my widowed mother's house in the suburbs during my first few months of work, and although the art department had a casual atmosphere, Ken and Gareth were my overlords who demanded all of my time. I learned discipline and how to take instructions from people who didn't give a damn about my degree, one that in no way prepared me for life in their world. In college, the earliest class was the dreaded 8 a.m. Those days were gone. Now I caught the 5:15 a.m. train to make the 45-minute commute to Union Station, and then hoof it following the dog-leg bend of the Chicago River down Wacker Drive to the office off Wabash Street. Well before Kenny G, as I called Ken and Gareth collectively, arrived with their bloodshot eyes and burping last night's cheap bourbon, I set up the art room, sharpened the charcoal pencils with the X-Acto knife, cleaned the T-squares, made sure we had ample supplies of paper, and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. And in between doing the odd drawings they needed, I was their gopher, running several times a day back and forth from our office to the agency's biggest client, Quaker Oats, right across the river. They quickly exorcised any notions of entitlement I might have had. If I may digress further, I think all the jobs I held before making my way to the Chicago Merc were parts of some master plan to prepare me for having my ego atomized the first day on the floor. My first paying gig at 16 was doing unskilled labor at an apple orchard, a bike ride from my house. One of the more glamorous duties was shoveling compost. In my senior year of high school, I was a physical education instructor at a housing community for the mildly to profoundly mentally disabled, and learned to deal with unpredictable, often violent and self-destructive eruptions. Such a position taught me patience and how to cope with irrational outbursts of plenty. In many ways, this experience provided the best training of all for dealing with irate traders. In summers during my college years, I waited tables at a place that offered itself up as a fine restaurant, but was really just a glorified hamburger joint. But I learned how to work under intense pressure. During the rush, as many as 5 tables, some just couples, other raucous groups of 10, would all be seated in my section at once. I think the hostess liked to overwhelm me as a sadistic flirtation, like a grammar school girl kicks the shin of the boy who strikes her fancy. That's when you had to learn to mentally stack up tables quickly in the correct priority of service, the immediate needs, that all-important, calming first round of drinks, those growing impatient, the ones twisting in their chairs and looking around as if expecting to spot their order orbiting the room in mid-air, then those enjoying les hamburgers and only in need of cursory attention, finally, those just waiting for the check. I would find these collating skills of tremendous value to me when the markets exploded and buy and sell orders were fired at me via hand signals from all over the floor. It's not far-fetched to claim cigarettes changed my life, and the architect of that change was strolling down East Wacker Drive just as I was putting the finishing touches on a sketch of a shiny red box with the word Magna emblazoned in diagonal retro 50s muscle car chrome along the front. Magna was a new brand of cigarette being proffered by the tobacco merchants of RJR Nabisco, who were one of our clients. Our agency was cynically tasked with making the products appeal to the youth market. rebellious packaging, flashy, in-your-face prime colors motif, vivid and vibrant. It was James Dean in a box of cancer stem.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?